Okay, at this time, we're going to talk about Chapter 8, Ground Ladders. We're going to look at all of the parts of the ground ladder, how to identify those parts, what they are. With the parts of your ladder, we have two different types of ladders. We have straight ladder, roof ladder, and we have extension ladders. With the straight and the roof ladder, the only difference between those two are the hooks at the tip. So we'll start with the tip end. The tip will have, if it is a roof ladder, will have the hooks that fold out and lock in place. With your single ladder, the two sides of the ladder that the rungs actually attach to are known as or called the beams. And then the rounded part that we actually climb on with your hands and feet are called the rungs. At the opposite end of the ladder is called the butt end of the ladder. And on most of our ground ladders, we have butt spurs, which are the spiked up two spurs that help dig in to the ground, if you will, or to the surface that we may place them on. If the ladder is constructed in a truss type form, as in the smaller picture that you see on the slide, then we may have what's known as a truss block that joins those two pieces of the beam or the truss part of the beam together to make one piece or one unit, if you will, for that beam. And we get into that with longer ladders to lighten them up and to add strength. Next is our extension ladder. Same thing on the top and the bottom. The top is called the tip, and the bottom is called the butt end of the ladder. With an extension ladder, we have moving sections and moving parts. The very bottom section or the base section is called the bed section. And then the next section would be the fly, and if it has more than one fly, there'll be an upper fly and a mid fly, or one that's in the middle. Also, there will be a pulley or a pulley system that helps raise the ladder, and the rope that we pull and that's rigged within the pulley system is called the halyard. On the butt end of these type of ladders, most often you will have a foot pad or a foot plate with a rubber pad on the bottom of it. And also, if that is tilted in the upright position as shown in the slide, we also may see a spike or a spur, if you will. So if we're looking right here, you'll see that spike right there. And that is also will lock up into that position and can be used to dig in to the surface. And then right here, this is known as the dogs or locks. The locking mechanism, as the ladder or the fly section raises, it clicks and locks in. In order to disengage it, you have to pull it up past the closest rung to it, unlock it, and then let it back down. Next, we're going to differentiate among the types of ladders. So like we said before, we know that we have single ladders, which are straight ladders, and we also have roof ladders. The difference being in these two ladders are the hooks on a roof ladder that fold out, lock in, and are engaged to, they're designed to engage the peak of the roof. As you see in the example here in this slide, again, that is the tip end of the ladder, and that's how those hooks will engage into the peak of the roof. And then we have extension ladders. Again, a multi-section ladder that is designed to reach greater heights, usually greater than 16 to 20 feet. These are 35s, 40, 45s, and even high and taller ladders. And they are designed to reach quite a ways up to a multi-story building. Next, we'll talk about how do we inspect, clean, and maintain our ladders. It's like anything else in the fire service. We have to inspect it every time we use it. You know, most folks are inspecting their equipment on a daily basis, looking it over. When we use it, we do a fine and detailed inspection to make sure that everything is okay with it and that it's ready to return to service. And then periodically, once a month, as an example, a lot of departments will clean and inspect ladders again as a monthly task. And then yearly, NFPA uh, states that we should inspect and test our ladders on an annual basis. So when we inspect it, we're looking for a few things. We're going to look over all the parts of the ladder basically and make sure, just visually inspect it and make sure that we have everything is intact, that we don't have any cuts, nicks, huge gouges, broken or loose rungs, damage to the beam, and we also want to take note and see if it's been exposed to excessive heat, especially the tip end of our ladder. So at that point, we're looking at and trying to determine if there is excessive wear and what caused it, and then we will further do our inspection according to our departmental SOPs. And a lot of standard operating procedures are to the tune that we will look at them for any visual defects, and that would take us further. And we definitely want to clean it. Oftentimes, you will clean first. You will get dirt, debris, road grime, that kind of thing off your ladders, and then do the inspection, because at that point you can see better what, if there is any damage, and what you're looking at. Again, when do we inspect? After each use, of course, and most departments' standard procedure is monthly on the inspection and cleaning. Next, we want to talk about this guy right here, which is our heat sensor label. They're kind of small and they look orange in the center of them. These are heat sensor labels, and they are placed on both metal and fiberglass ladders. They, when heavy carbon deposits and the blisters up, the ladder tips, it can get as hot, to change the discoloration in these. And also, anytime that we see discoloration on fiberglass ladders as well, we know that that has been exposed to a good amount of heat. So when your labels change, or when you blister paint, or when you discolor fiberglass, are all signs that we've exposed it to too much heat. Again, we're going through the ladder. We're going to look at the rung for damage or wear, and also tightness. We want to make sure that they don't slip, that they don't turn in place. They should be solid. We look at all bolts and rivets for tightness. For any defects, we look for cracks in the welds, cracks, splintering, breaks, gouges, any wavy patterns, or deformities of the beams. And then we're going to also look at areas worn from vibration at the points of contacts with the apparatus or ladder mounts. This is a key area where we can get some wear depending on what type of mount system that you use. Traditionally, the ones that hang off the side where the ladders hang from the rack and then are locked in, those are the ones you get the vibration wear. If they're bedded in the back of the truck flat, usually they're stored flat, and they don't get a lot of vibration wear. One thing to note here is we want to replace these heat sensors right here when their expiration date is reached. And it's kind of funny, everything has an expiration date. And a few years ago, we were checking ladders and we were doing the yearly test, and the inspection guy came up and said, hey, all of these labels are now expired. And we're thinking, wow, they expire? And he said, yes. So we ended up having to purchase several hundred of these labels to replace them. So do realize that these sensor, color change type sensor stickers do have an expiration date, and they may not work properly if they are expired. Bolts or wooden ladders should not be so tight that they crush the wood. I realize there's not a lot of wooden ladders left out there, but there are still some. And as a matter of fact, San Francisco Fire Department exclusively uses primarily wooden ladders across the board because of the way that city and town is built. The buildings are built so close together, and the majority of your power are overhead service drops. And so they can't run the risk of even beam raising an aluminum ladder in that city. So they choose wood because it does not conduct electricity as well as the aluminum does. You certainly would still take the same precautions. You'd still look for overhead wires and obstructions before you do any type of raise. But this is one reason why that they use wooden ladders. And it's interesting. You can get on YouTube. You can look at San Francisco wooden ladders. You can search that and come up with a nice video that shows their shop. They make their own ladders. They repair their own ladders from the ground up. And it's a very interesting video to watch. A warning here, any ladder that has been subjected to a direct flame contact has been exposed to what we would consider high heat, or has the heat sensor label has changed its color, is unsafe for use and should be removed from service. And at that point, we want to test the ladder under the normal annual testing procedures. Once it is deemed good and or repaired, it can be then placed back in service. Again, we have to replace the heat sensors and do any repair to the ladder that might be necessary. So in our procedure for inspecting ladders, when we find damage, the first thing we want to do is obviously remove this ladder from service. We want to notify the frontline supervisor that, hey, we found damage. We're going to now remove it from service. If it is unable to be repaired, then the ladder should be destroyed and scrapped for parts, because this is a piece of equipment that we don't want to use, not even for training. I know a lot of times, uh, excuse me, a lot of times that we back apparatus into something and we'll bend that bottom rung because your ladder sticks out from the back a little bit, and that bottom rung gets bent, and at that point it's out of service until it is repaired. You can replace rungs if it doesn't damage the beams to the point where a rung can no longer be attached. So that's one example. Ladder markings, the designated length and number should be on your each end of your ladder. You may see a manufacturer's nameplate. Apparatus designed or locally assigned inventory numbers may also be, visible on the ladder. White tip or some type of reflective tape is common near the tip. It is also common that these numbered stickers be reflective as well. And then you may also see a balance point stripe that's been either a piece of tape or a marker, a paint marker mark, may be placed at the balance point of the ladder. And what that's there for is to help us once we do especially when we do our single firefighter carries. Something to note here, again, wood ladders should not be painted because this would conceal damage to the wood. With a wooden ladder, the wood needs to be protected with a clear type finish. That enables us to see the finish, to see if there's any dry rotting, to see if there's any cracking of the wood, those kind of defects that oftentimes paint will cover up. Next are some labels that we may see. Manufacturer certification labels will be in place somewhere on your ladder, and usually we find them on the beams. Electrical hazard warning labels. Again, this warns us, this gives us a warning in our mind that we do not want to raise ladders into overhead power lines. And also you may see a positioning label right here that basically tells us how to set the angle of the ladder. The proper climbing angle of a ground ladder, if you will, is 75 degrees. And so this little or yellow sticker with the fireman with his hands outreach touching a rung. Basically, if if you can stand with your feet, the toes of your feet up against the beams of the ladder there, and you can reach forward and comfortably touch one of the rungs, you're at 75 degrees. And then again, the other sticker or label that you may see is the heat label sensor that we've already talked about. Inspecting metal ladders, we want to look for evidence of flame impingement or any heat damage, discoloration to the ladder, the heat sensors have been changed or not. We also want to look for corrosion or rust. Even though the majority of our ladders are put together with aluminum, there are still some corrosion points with stainless steel that can cause rust. Also, we're looking at loose or missing rivets or fasteners. Any loose or damaged rungs would put your ladder out of service until repaired. Cracks, bends, or other damage. Dry rot or damage to the halyard. So the halyard and the ropes that raise our extension ladders, depending on whether they're natural fiber or synthetic fiber ropes, can show damage and wear. And this is the time if we see rot, damage, or wear, we want to replace the halyard. Fiberglass ladders, again, we're looking for cracks, chipping, or other damage to fiberglass components. We know that fiberglass material is very strong, but it is susceptible to chipping and cracking when they take a hard hit. So this is something you don't see a lot of fiberglass ladders in the fire service. We do have some here and there, and if you do, just be aware that they're a little more prone to the chipping. We're also looking for loose or missing rivets or fasteners with these type of ladders as well. Evidence of flame impingement or heat damage, corrosion, rust on the metal components, any loose or damaged rugs, again, just like with our metal ladders, damaged or missing rubber on the foot pads, and any dry rot or damage to your halyard. And another thing to keep in mind with fiberglass is fiberglass will burn a lot easier than aluminum. Aluminum will burn. It has to be in a finer arrangement. The fiberglass beams on a ladder will burn, catch on fire. Wooden ladders or ladders with wooden components, we want to look and check out the areas where finish has been chafed or scraped. These are areas that we may need to revarnish and clear coat, and we want to check those for damage. Darkening of the varnish, any dark streaks in the wood might denote water damage such as rotting and or mildew. So maybe we have a crack in the varnish or the finish and it needs to be sanded down and repaired. Marred, worn, cracked, or splintered parts should be repaired. Shoes rounded or smooth, and any water damage that may have occurred. Again, the varnish and the clear coat on our wooden ladders, it's its protection. So a caution here, any indication of wood deterioration is reason for the ladder to then be removed from service, basically until it can be service tested, repaired, service tested, and placed back in service. Next on our list is roof ladders. With roof ladders, we're going to inspect the very same things that we have with the other ladders, but more specifically, we are now looking at the hook assembly. We want to make sure that the hook assembly works freely, easily, and locks in place, and it stays locked in place. We're also looking that there's no signs of rust or deformities, and that there's no loose parts in the system. With extension ladders, we're looking at the very same things as with our straight ladders, and we're going to add a few things. So we're going to look at the pawl assembly. The hook and the finger assembly should move freely. Sometimes these get corroded up, or sometimes they will get road grime and corrosion on them, and we need to lubricate properly and ensure that they're freely working. We want to look at our halyards and our pulley systems. The pulley system should turn freely. The halyard should be replaced if it is worn or damaged as well. And then the ladder guides on your fly sections have guides that they move and slide up against to keep everything together as a unit, but we'll still let it move. And so we want to look at the condition of our guides and make sure everything moves freely. Service testing ladders, again, these should be service tested before being placed into service. So the new ladder that we get, we should service test before placing it into service. And then from that point, an annual service test is recommended by the NFPA. After any use that exposes them to high heat or any rough treatment, if you had a ladder slide off the side of a building and crash to the ground, again, anything like that, we want to do an inspection and probably at that point need to service test that ladder. Next on our list is cleaning. This is something that my department does monthly. We will pull ladders off and scrub and clean with soapy water and rinse, and then we will do a formal inspection on them. If we feel necessary on our weekly Saturday checks, we'll also do it then if they get grimy and nasty, especially in the wintertime is when we see this the most. So you want to use soft bristled brushes and just regular water, a mild soap. Sometimes you can use a mild solvent to remove tar or oils that get on from structure fire, this oily residue, but you do want to use a mild solvent on it to clean that off. Otherwise, soap and water. Lubricate according to your standard operating procedures or the manufacturer's recommendations. The manufacturers of these ladders will give you steps and guidance on how to lubricate your dog's locks and swivel points and pulleys and that kind of thing. Look for any damage or wear while you're cleaning and report those defects, and then we want to wipe dry as much as we can get it dry after we clean it. Maintenance. Keeping our ladders in a state of usefulness and readiness is our goal. One of the more important tools we have, especially on working structure fires that are where we have firefighters working in upper stories, is your ground ladders. All firefighters should be able to perform the maintenance tasks, and certainly all firefighters should be able to, clean and inspect the ladders. On the side of repair, this is the restoration uh, where we replace fix damaged or what may be worn out and put it back into service. And this needs to be done by someone who is a trained technician. Typically, my department, the company that comes and ladder tests for us on an annual basis, if we have a major repair to a ladder, they will do it then. Continuing on with maintenance, we would like to keep our ladders free of moisture. Certainly, even our aluminum ladders, we want to keep dried off as much as possible. I think that the ladders that are bedded from the rear and kind of contained in a compartment where they don't reach the elements when we're driving out in the rain and the snow is best. But that is an expensive setup, and a lot of departments can't afford that. They'll have the side mount type ladder set up that's exposing your ladders to the weather. It's certainly fine. We just need to keep them rinsed and dried off. We want to store and position ladders away from vehicle exhaust or engine heat. And again, store so that they're not exposed to the weather elements. Paint only for purposes of identification and invisibility. So you may paint the tip a white color or a bright color so the tip can be easily seen when you're on a roof in a smoky environment or when it's up in a window in a smoky environment, but we wouldn't paint the entire ladder a solid color, if you will. And it's certainly fine to stencil markings such as Engine 4, Aerial 2, so we know that those ground ladders belong with that apparatus and they get put back in place. Next is safe practices for using our ground ladders. So we want to develop and maintain upper body strength. Firefighting is an inherently dangerous job, and it is it is a hard job, and so it does require, to a certain degree, upper body strength. We want to operate according to our departmental training and procedures. If your department or our department does a specific type of carry, or they don't do any single carries with the exception of emergencies, then we want to follow those guidelines. As an example, wear full PPE when handling and working with ladders. Choose the correct ladder for your assigned task. And remember, when we lift, to lift with your leg muscles, not your back or arm muscles. When lifting below the waist, make sure you're using your legs. Use adequate number of firefighters for the carry and for the raise. Do not raise within 10 foot of electrical wires. And this is one of the big safety key points here that we talk about, and that is the 10-foot rule. And so we want to make sure that we stay from 10 feet away from electrical wires. You say, why 10 feet? Electrical and some of these higher voltage setups can jump as far as 10 feet. They can arc as far as 10 feet and reach out and touch you. So that's definitely a safety tip that we want you to adhere to. Secure the tip and anchor the foot during training or emergencies when possible. Grasp the beams when extending or retracting. Basically, you don't want to be reaching through the rungs while an extension ladder, while the fly section is unlocked and sliding. Because if that slides or that slips, the halyard slips out of the firefighter's hand that's raising it, it could fall with enough force to break your arm. And then we want to ensure the hooks of the paws are seated over the rung. So we want to make sure that we hear the click click, and when you let it back down, that it is solid and securely locked out. We also want to ensure the ladder is stable before climbing. So when you reach out, you set your 75-degree angle or near it, you reach out, you stand on that bottom rung and make sure that that is seated. If it's in grass or gravel, that it's kind of seated, locked in the ground. If it is on pavement, chances are you're going to have somebody constantly heel it. And we should be heeling ladders when people are climbing it as much as possible. We want to use caution when moving ladders sideways. They tend to be, they get awkward, especially an extension ladder that's extended most of the way up, and we begin to slide the bed section, and the upper section doesn't follow, or it gets caught on the roof line or the gutter work, and then next thing you know, we have a ladder falling on its beam. And not only can it be dangerous to the people on the fire ground, but it can also do damage to our ladders. When we climb ladders, we want to climb smoothly and with rhythm, and be efficient when you climb the ladder. Never overload a ladder. One firefighter every 10 feet is the rule, or one per section if you're on an extension ladder. Use a leg lock or a ladder belt when you're working from a ladder. And this does not apply to aerial apparatus. This only applies to ground ladders. You would not lock off on an aerial apparatus. You would use a ladder belt and keep your feet and your legs out of the rungs on those aerial apparatus. But ground ladders you can lock off on by doing a leg lock and securing yourself on the ladder. Relocate position ladder only when ordered to do so. This is an important safety guideline, because if we have a firefighting team climb a ladder and they're working on the roof, and then we have another firefighting team moves that ladder to a different side to do a different task instead of getting a second ladder, we have now removed the ladder from the point of entry that first team knew about. So if something happens and they have to retreat quickly, they're going to retreat where they know their ladder is. And so we don't want to relocate or reposition unless we are ordered to do so by incident command. We want to use ladders for their intended purposes only. You wouldn't flow a hose line off of an attic ladder because it is not designed and intended for that use. You would want to use a straight ladder or a regular extension ladder to do those type of operations. For an example, We want to inspect for damage and wear after each use, and then we want to secure unattended ladders to a stationary object when possible. Ladders can come in contact with power sources, and this can result in electrocution of anyone in contact with the ladder. If we look back to case studies, we've had several line of duty deaths over the years that have been directly related to ladders coming in contact with power lines and power sources. Sliding down a ladder, either feet first or head first, even in an emergency, is an unsafe and operation and may result in serious injury or death. We only do the head first ladder bells we do that in a very specific training, and we have a very specific way that we come out and then turn on the ladder, and then we will descend it as normal. So keep that in mind. This is a very specific training that firefighters do. Otherwise, it's an unsafe event, so we don't want to do that. When lifting and lowering ladders, safety-wise, movement should be smooth and controlled. If there is a team lift and you want teamwork is at play, usually the person at the butt end of the ladder is giving the commands, because that is the direction of travel once your lift is complete. Pick the correct number of firefighters for the ladder lift and carry that you're doing. Bend at the knees, keep your back straight as possible, and lift with your legs. There is a tendency, especially with the way our ladders are designed, they are lightweight, and we tend to want to stoop and bend over and pick them up. But it takes the smallest things to cause an injury. So again, keep your back straight and use your legs. Lift on command of the firefighter who can see all the members of the team. Again, that's usually the person that's positioned at the butt end of the ladder. And then lifting should occur in unison. A lot of times there'll be ready lift will be a command. We use ready lift a lot because it uses less oxygen if you're breathing air, or less air if you're breathing air on an SCBA, and it is a clear and concise type command. So when we lower the ladder, again, use your leg muscles, keep your back straight, and your feet correctly placed on the ground. Again, I know this is in here several times, but avoid electrical hazards. Always look up to check an overhead wires and power drops or other equipment. Look up again before you raise that ladder. Keep your distance at least 10 feet from energized electrical lines or equipment. You may need to use an alternate raising method in an area where we might choose to do a traditional raise. We may end up using a beam raise, and that's one of the reasons why we train you to do a beam raise, is in confined quarters in spaces such as alleys, and the other is for the modified raise is to keep you out of service drops and power lines and energized equipment. Again, all ladders will conduct electricity, especially when wet, regardless of what they're made out of. Even wooden ladders conduct electricity. So again, look up, check for overhead obstructions, power drops, and other energy source type equipment. So positioning of the fly section, how should we do this? Fly in, fly out. Right here you see this is a metal ladder, and the fly section is out. And this is going to be how metal and fiberglass ladders are raised and put into position. So typically when we place a ladder up against the building and raise it, it is fly in, because that puts the halyard out to where you can use it. So at some point we're going to have to flip this ladder, if you will, and put it fly out. The wooden ladder that we see here, the fly section is in, or it is towards the building right here. So fly in for wooden ladders if you have them, fly out for metal and fiberglass ladders. Securing the halyard, we want to tie off the halyard after we've placed the ladder and before we climb it. Closed halyards are already tied. If it's already tied off with enough slack that you can properly raise. If it is not, then we need to tie it off, and typically we tie off to a rung using the clove hitch around an object. Next, we're going to talk about the process of carrying a ladder. And we start with removing the ladder from the apparatus. Pumper apparatus, 1 or 2 firefighters is usually what it requires. On your pumpers, you're carrying, usually you got 24 footers. You may have a 35 footer depending on the truck, and you'll have a 16 or a 20 straight ladder, usually a 14 or a 16 roof ladder. Aerial apparatus carry a lot more ground ladders and bigger ladders. You will definitely have a 35, 24 extension. You're going to have a 14 to 16 and or a 20 straight ladder, and 1 or 2 of those are going to be roof ladders. And in some aerial apparatus, you may have like a 14-foot roof ladder on the aerial, mounted on the aerial ladder on the upper fly section as well. And with these, some of these are 3 and 4 firefighter carries on your bigger ladders. So we want to pick or select the correct ladder for the job. The incident commander or the supervisor usually determines ladder and ladder placement, but you must be able to select your own. So a lot of times you're given the task, hey, I need you to ladder side B of this structure and raise it into the rescue position, which means you're going to put it at the sill of the window most likely. So you need to know, all right, this is 2 stories. I'm probably going to need at least that 24 footer to do the job. Then you go to the apparatus and pick the correct ladder. When working on a roof or upper stories, there must be at least 2 means of escape at the locations remote from each other. So if we raise to the roof on side A, then one of the other sides that's applicable, we need to raise a second ladder for a secondary means of egress. Again, selecting the correct ladders for the first story roof, 16 to a 20-foot straight may get you there. Second story window, 20 to 28-foot extension. Second story roof, probably going to need a 35 footer in most cases. Third story window, this is where the bigger ladders come into play. 40 to 50 foot, 4-story over 40 feet. For ground ladders, these are big ladders. These are ladders that have stay pose, and these are definitely 4 and 5 firefighter raises. Total length of a single section ladder and the maximum extended length of an extension ladder. You know, you want to note the ladder's reach. So set at that 75-degree angle, what will this ladder actually reach to? Single, roof, and folding ladders are required to have measured length equal to the designated length. All right, so its length, it's going to reach what it says it'll reach. Extension ladders may be as much as 6 inches less than the designated length. Again, when we put ourselves at that 75-degree climbing angle for taller ladders, where we're coming up, that's where we're coming up short. Selecting the correct ladder, again, working on the roof, we want 3 to 5 rungs beyond the roof's edge. So we want to choose a ladder that's going to get that at least that 3-4 rungs minimum above that roof's edge, set at the 75-degree angle. For ventilation, even with the window, and we want it up to the upwind side when we're setting up ladders for ventilation. When we're setting up ladders for rescue, the tip just below the windowsill is what's going to work best. Something to note, building walls or parapets that extend more than 6 feet above the roof may require the use of an additional ladder to reach the roof decking. You may place a roof ladder or straight ladder on the roof side of the parapet and next to the extension ladder to help assist firefighters from the original ladder to transition onto the roof. So a parapet wall basically is a wall that is there for looks. A lot of times we see these on the A side of buildings, but they can be all the way around. And they make a building with a flat roof look more elaborate. A lot of times they are kind of a decorative on a building front. And so they could be as much as 6-10 feet tall above that roof line. We're going to ladder, above the parapet wall, not knowing, how far away the decking is from that ledge. So you may have to have a roof ladder up there to transition over and then climb down onto the roof on the other side of that parapet wall. Max working heights for ladders that are set at the proper angle. This just quickly gives us an idea of what a designated length will get you, the max reach that'll get you for these lengths. So an example, a 20-foot ladder is going to get you 19. A 35 is going to get you about 34 reach. A 50 about 48. So it's about a 1 foot difference until we get into the taller ladders, as you can see there with the 45 and the 50 footer. Next is removing ladders from the apparatus. Right here is the side mount that we talked about that you typically see. You can have the vertical or the horizontal interior compartment, which is nice, and then some folks have these nice hydraulic mechanical type ladder lifts. It keeps the ladders up and away from their compartment doors and takes up less space, but it has a mechanical function that brings it down within the firefighter's reach. You must know types, length, and location of the ladders on the apparatus to make your choice, how the ladders are stored and or how they are nested. Obviously, they have to go back on the apparatus when we're finished, so we have to know how they're nested together to get everything locked in. Order in which the nested ladders are stored. Again, that order and the way they nest all has to be put back together. And a lot of times what we'll see is markings or pieces of tape on the ladders themselves, and it will help us line everything up and show us how they are nested. Whether the extensions ladders fly is inside or outside, we have to know on a particular apparatus, and then the method used to secure the ladders in place, any mounting brackets, where they're located. What usually we'll mark the ladder before or after the rung with a piece of tape or a paint marker, so we'll know exactly where that ladder hangs on the rack. And again, many departments find good practice to mark their ladders to indicate which rungs go near the brackets. So this is kind of what I'm talking about here. Right here we see two pieces of tape that are marking exactly how this ladder is going to hang on the mount. So with mounted ladders, we want to unlatch your securing devices and then lift the ladder off the bracket and into the carrying position. Some of these ladders, this can be done by a single firefighter, and some of these bigger extension ladders, it's going to take more than one person to unbed and get off the mounts. When the ladders are in internal compartments, whether vertical or horizontally stored, we got to open the compartment access door or panel, slide the ladder out to the proper carrying point, and then position on the same side for the carry if there's multiple firefighters. Safety considerations for carrying ladders. We want to avoid obstructions, maintain your situational awareness of other firefighters and those that are around. Lift with your legs again and not your back, keeping your back straight. Look ahead to scan for obstructions, people, and trip hazards. Use the appropriate number of personnel. If it is a single, 14, 16, 20 foot, either roof or straight ladder, most single, carries can be used, a single firefighter. Uh, our 24 and 35 footers, extension ladders, especially 35 footers, at least 2 firefighters. If you have like double fly, 35, 40, or 50 footers, you're going to need 3, 4, firefighters to carry these ladders. Again, work and communicate as a team. Identify the team member, the member that's given the commands. Carry roof ladders with hooks closed, and then carry your ladders with the butt end first. We carry ladders butt end first because typically you're going in the direction of the raise in most cases, especially if you're a single firefighter doing a single raise up against a structure. You're going to place that butt end of the ladder down first. Caution: carrying the forward end of a ladder at eye level impedes the carrier's balance and visibility, and it does increase the risk of the butt spur striking someone else in the head. So slightly down, keep your vision clear, and find that balance point on the beam. Next, we're going to talk about the proper procedure for placing your ground ladders. Maintaining our situational awareness at all times is key. Not just ladder assignments, but you want to maintain your situational awareness on the fire ground at all times. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Listen to the radio. It's not the time to carry on conversation and talk with your pals. It is the time to pay attention to the radio, look at what's going on around you, and keep that high level of awareness. So with our ladder assignments, we want to observe and communicate the presence of overhead electrical wires and obstructions. Look for those, any ground conditions that might be a problem. We want to know building, structural integrity of the building, wind direction and speed. On a real windy day, it can be a challenge sometimes to get extension ladders deployed. Appropriateness of the chosen ladder. We want to make sure, again, is this ladder the right ladder for the job at hand, the task at hand? And then any structural features of the building that might complicate things. A lot of times an overhang with a soffit in a single firefighter raise, you can put that ladder up against the building, but you're only going to get it as far as the soffit. You're going to have to pull it out a little bit to clear that little bit of overhang. So that could be a feature of a structure that you have to think about before you go to do the raise. Ladder placement: position the ladder properly for its intended use. Again, we want to think about fly in, fly out on your metal and fiberglass versus wooden ladders. Place the butt to the proper distance from the building for easy and safe climbing. Typically that is about 75 degrees. Again, if you could stand with your toes up against the butt end of the beams, reach out, and if you can straight and comfortably touch the rungs, then you are at 75-degree angle. Placing ladders for ventilation and rescue. For ventilation, upwind side of the window, the tip even with the top of the window, we use when firefighters need to climb in or out of a narrow window or direct hose streams into them. For rescue, we want the tip slightly below the window sill. Wedge that tip under the sill if possible for stability. Extend the ladder 2 or 3 rungs above the sill if there is room to permit the tip to project into the window, and then allow room for entry and rescue beside it. So a wider window, you may be able to project that tip into the window. Place your ladders near at least 2 points on different sides of the building. Again, you want a secondary means of egress. Avoid placing over openings where they might be exposed to heat and or direct flame. take advantages of strong points in building construction, raise the ladder directly in front of a window when it is used for support, or a smoke ejector, which is removing smoke, just smoke out of a structure. And avoid placing ladders where they may contact overhead obstructions. Again, our big safety concern when we raise is overhead obstructions. Avoid placing on uneven terrain or soft spots where one beam or the other will sink in to the point where it will cause the ladder to tilt, if you will. We want to avoid placing in front of paths of travel. Avoid placing on top of sidewalk, elevator, trap doors, or deadlift lights. And do not place against unstable surfaces. So climbing angle, again, about 75 degrees. The distance of the ladder butt from the building establishes this angle between the ladder and the ground. If the ladder is too close, then it is less stable. If the ladder is too far, its load carrying capability is then reduced and it has more tendency to then slip away. So the optimum angle, with certain exceptions, is 75 degrees. An exception may be if we've placed a ladder for rescue, depending on, how far up that windowsill is, it may be less than 75 degrees, and therefore we would definitely want to heel that ladder and tie it back. To determine the proper distance of the butt from the building, mathematically we can divide the working length of the ladder by 4, and that will give you approximately how many feet away from the building that butt end needs to be. We also have the nice pictogram sticker on the beams of the ladders these days. It has an arrow telling you, right here which direction to pull the ladder out, and it also gives you the key points of, you want your feet up against the beam, your arms out stretched straight outright, and you're touching a beam that gives you that proper climbing angle. So you can quickly do that without doing math in your head. Next is we're going to describe the ways to secure our ground ladders. Lock extension ladder locks before placing the ladder against the structure, so we make sure that everything is then locked out, and we tie the halyard off to the extension ladder, preferably with the clove hitch around the rung or around an object, and then we want to heel and or secure our ladder with the rope to a firm object that's nearby. If you are heeling a ladder, please wear complete PPE, including your helmet with your face shield down. Be alert for falling objects or debris. Stay alert for firefighters descending the ladder. When you heel beneath the ladder, stand with your feet shoulder width apart, grasp the beams about eye level, and then pull the ladder towards the building. Look forward, not up, when somebody is climbing. I'm not a big fan of heeling a ladder this way, but when you're in close quarters, small alleys, and in tight areas, you may have to use this technique. When heeling a ladder from outside the ladder, stand outside the ladder, chalk the butt of butt end with your foot, place the toes against the butt spur, or place one foot on the bottom rung. Grasp the beams and press the ladder against the building. A lot of times, once a firefighter started climbing, you can switch over with that other foot and then grasp the other beam right here and have both feet, both hands pressing against the building as well. Tying in, this prevents the ladder from pulling away from a building. If we have handrail or an opportunity, depending on the building construction, we can certainly tie in. Rope hose tools, safety straps, webbing is all of the things that we can use to tie in. Utility rope, again, we can tie in even at the bottom to help heel the ladder. Next, we're going to talk about the methods for raising and lowering. The raising method would depend on the ladder type and size of the ladder, the number of personnel available, and even the topography and the weather. When we transition from a carry to a raise, we want to note not necessary to place the ladder flat on the ground prior to raising. This is kind of where you can dig the butt end of the ladder in to the ground and begin that raise immediately, especially if you're doing a single firefighter beam raise. You can also get the butt end of your ladder up against the building at the ground, right at where the building and the ground meet, if you will, and immediately start raising rung over rung. When you do this transition, you want it to be smooth, you want it to be a continuous motion. Please make sure that you look up and check for overhead obstructions, because you're literally walking, and as you walk, you're going to begin to transition into and do this raise without stopping. And so it is very easy to completely forget about looking up and seeing if there's overhead obstructions, especially at nighttime. So here's the one firefighter raise, single ladder. And what they're talking about in that transition, they're going to let that beam slide right up on the shoulder. And also, same thing with your extension ladder. Your extension ladder being a heavier ladder, you can also get it flat, wedged up in against this corner right here, and go ahead and raise that rung over rung by yourself. Two firefighter raises are a little bit different. Of course, you have two people. You'll have what I call a hill man, or a hill firefighter will be healing even here or here, even if you're doing a beam raise. And they'll also, at some point, when the beams get close enough to their hands, they're going to reach out and grab that and help with the raise and help steady it when it's in the upright position. Same thing with your beam raise. This firefighter here is acting as a counterweight once he gets a hold of the opposite beam during the raise. Three firefighters raises, ladders that are 35 feet or longer typically will require at least three. This is where you'll have one firefighter healing and acting as a counterweight, and you'll have the other two that will be raising with the beams and the rungs. Four firefighter raise used for larger and heavier extension ladders. A flat raise is normally recommended and used. Procedures are then similar to the three firefighter raise with the exception of the placement of the personnel. So with this, you may have two firefighters healing the ladder and acting as counterweights, and the other two raising from the beams and the rungs on the opposite side. If we need to pivot a raised ladder, this may be necessary when the fly is incorrectly positioned and the ladder is flat raised parallel to the building. So we want to pivot before we extend it, if at all possible, because if we extend that ladder now, especially as far away from the building as they are in this picture right here, then you're going to get really top heavy quick. And it's going to be very hard, especially if there's any wind blowing at all, for these three or four firefighters to keep this ladder from crashing down. So we want to pivot on the beam closest to the structure and go ahead and pivot it to fly in or fly out depending on the construction of your ladder. Shifting an already raised ladder, this should be limited to short distances. One firefighter can safely shift a single ladder that is 20 feet or shorter. Extension ladders most of the time will require two firefighters. You can flip a ladder that's already set at its angle. If you look up and you see that you're not going to catch on anything, you can begin to flip this ladder over and over and over and over from the side, and you can move it pretty easily by yourself. One method it also is to slide the top of the ladder sideways against the building and then move the butt into position. So some of this may depend on the type of terrain that you have on the ground and the topography. Next is safe working from our ladders. Climb smoothly. Ascend so there is the least possible amount of bounce and sway. And then check that climbing angle and secure the ladder before climbing. So we want to make sure that the ladder is heeled and secured before we begin climbing. And you don't want to bounce excessively and cause a big bounce and sway. Keep your eyes forward, glancing at the tip of the ladder occasionally. Keep your arms straight and horizontal. Place hands on the rungs when not carrying equipment. If you don't have a piece of equipment, an axe or a Halligan tool that you're climbing with, keep your hands on the rungs, both hands. Grasp alternating rungs with palms down and thumbs between the rungs. Coordinate your foot movement. Place feet near beams with halyard tie in the center of the rung, and climb using leg muscles, not your arm muscles. 2 ways to secure to a ladder. One is the leg lock that we see here. You're going to run your foot through a rung, down and back through a rung, and you can catch the beam as seen here. You can also just stand on the rung below depending on how tall you are and how long your legs are. And then the other method is the ladder belt right here. You don the ladder belt and you're clipped into the rung as you work. Another warning, do not exceed the rated load capacity of the ladder. To avoid overloading the ladder, allow only one firefighter on each section of the ladder at the same time. Be careful about stressing ladders laterally. Also, another warning, use a leg lock only when working from a ground ladder. Never use a leg lock again, like I said, on an aerial ladder. Extending or retracting the ladder then could result in serious injury. So we only do leg locks on ground ladders. Carrying tools up and down our ladders is a little awkward. It kind of disrupts the natural motion of climbing, and it may be desirable to slide one hand along the beam rather than the rungs. Hoisting rather than carrying is preferred when possible. Next is deploying our roof ladder. You want to go ahead and have your hooks out and deployed, locked in. As you climb the ladder, you find the balance point of your roof ladder. You find that balance point, you get it up on your shoulder, climb it, and then you're going to shove that roof ladder like it's pictured here along its beam until you get close to the peak, and you're going to rock it on over and lock those hooks in to the peak of the roof right there. So again, this is our flow chart for the roof ladder. We're going to carry the roof ladder with the hooks closed to the extension ladder. We'll then deploy the hooks, lock them out. We'll climb with the roof ladder or receive the roof ladder after we've partially climbed the extension ladder. Either way is acceptable. Next, we carry the roof ladder to the roof. You'll need that on your shoulder and you'll need it balanced out. Lock in with a leg lock or use your ladder belt. Then place the ladder on its side or on its beam on the roof. Slide the roof ladder up to the peak and then rock it over and engage the hooks over the roof's peak. Next are the methods to assist a victim down a ladder. A conscious victim, we want the ladder tip raised just below the windowsill. We want to make sure that the ladder is then heeled with all the loads and activity removed, and then at least 4 firefighters are going to be needed for this process. You'll need 1 on the ladder, you're going to need possibly 1 or 2 heeling the ladder, and you're going to need a couple firefighters up in the window. An unconscious victim assisting, you're going to have help getting our victim onto the ladder. And basically, you can do this a couple ways. The method that we see here seems to work best if we can get them positioned on the ladder that way. Just basically, you're going to take a knee up into the groin or the crotch and let both legs, both arms hang over the beams, and you're just going to gently slide the victim down as you walk down, keeping your knee in their crotch. I prefer that your hands be locked over to the rungs and not necessarily sliding on the beams, but each way is acceptable. You can also lay the victim completely across the ladder, either from the front or the back of them, as we see in the next two photographs here, the one in the center and the one to the right. And same thing, we're going to support them with our arms and slide them along the beams as we walk or descend the ladder. Assisting a large victim is going to take possibly two ladders, and it may take two, maybe even three firefighters in the process to get the victim, in position to slide down, and you'll have to work together to descend the ladder and keep full control. Again, you're going to have multiple firefighters in the room and at the window, and you're going to have at least two to heal these ladders. Children it's a little easier with children. Sometimes they're small enough you can grab them up in one arm and descend. You can also cradle them in your arms like you see in this picture and walk down with them in your arms that way.